Yo, what up guys, it's me, SearingSorrow, and I'm back with another episode of Bad Fanfiction reading. So today is Feet Caked in Seed, Ready to Serve by Lego 3. And, oh dear, I'm so ready to look forward for this fic. And this was awesome, another request, and thank you to this particular someone who has been, sending me requests, and that for bad fanfics. I don't want to attempt pronouncing your name because then it's gonna come out really weird, but I don't know for some reason. But but thank you again. Anyways, here we go. An old despicable mare known as Temperance Flowerdew had started a riot in the peaceful town of Ponyville. She despised sugar and wanted to see it eradicated. Maybe she's trying to lower the obesity rates. Oh, that's a thing. Yes, she just wants to see the obesity rates lower. Because, yes. Obesity. I just went there. And she had somehow gotten the entire town behind her. What was with the ponies of this town? Seriously, it was like newcomers can make them all think with a hive mind. With a hive mind. That sounds like something out of Matrix. I'm not even lying. If Zecora, Trixie, and the Flim Flam brothers weren't enough proof, then this mare was. The one hit hardest by this awful boycott was Mrs. Cupcake. It didn't take longer than a week of no business for her and her husband separate under pressure. He took the two somewhat grown-up fillies they had together. However, there was a certain unicorn that had taken a liking to Mrs. Cake. His name was Anonymous. Because he'd rather be known as Anonymous. And now we're going into the Anonymous. Let's go. And then half we're all gonna go, because actually there is an Instagram account for Anonymous, and I won't go too much into that stuff, because half of you are gonna get really pissy at that. And I don't need a bunch of pissy people in the comment section. Or mentions if you're watching this from Twitter, who knows. He was always ready to take what he wanted. Several times he asked the sexy baker out on dates, and she rejected him every time for two reasons. She didn't like having her feet touched, and she had a husband. And she probably had a valid reason to be. Because you don't want to be caught under scrutiny. So he planned on a way to take the love of his life by force and learned a spell that renders the subject unconscious but painlessly. I'm not sure if I like the sound of that. He may have wanted to touch the sweet baker any way he desired, but he wasn't the violent sort. With Sugar Cube cornered shut down and no one inside, he saw his opportunity to use the spell without being a suspect. While the ponies were rioting about the nonsensical myths of sugar, he climbed into the bakery through one of the windows on the roof. Meanwhile, Mrs. Cake was pacing around the floor of the confectionery she and her husband had built from the ground up over many years. Oh dear, no customers, no customers in weeks. What can we do? Dear Celestia, I hope these 6 I'll make it prog. Mrs. Cake stopped short. She felt a massive tingling in the back of her head and a noticeable dizziness. Dizziness. What the heck? I said Disneyness. That made no sense. She groaned and held her head, sitting down in one of the booths before she collapsed and hurt herself. She was now asleep, laying on her side. It worked. I did it, Anand muttered, a visible bulge already straining against his black pants. The soft, squishy mare was all his now. Let's see what you look like without those slip-ons, little tickle slave. Slowly, Mrs. Cake awoke to find herself bound to a chair. The plump, soft mare was confused to find that her legs were on display, ankles tied together, right on top of the counter where transactions were made. One more, her electric blue feet were as bare as the rest of her body. What's going on? Why am I... Oh dear, you're getting ready for the weird stuff. She stopped short when she noticed the unicorn step into view, ready as he ever was. Anonymous? Did you do this to me? She shouted angrily as he sat down on top of the counter. Of course I did, Mrs. Cake. I grew tired of you rejecting me, so I did what I had to do, and you know exactly what I want from you, he said with a large grin on his face, more like a cheese-eating grin. Mrs. Cake thought back for a bit, and then the horror of realization came onto her mind, into her face. No, not that, Mrs. Cake begged, but Anon was already on her feet like an icing-using wizard on a treasure hunter with only a shovel in his backpack. I'm not sure how that would end. That would probably end badly, especially if your shovel broke. Okay, Reddy grabbed the back of Mrs. Cake's right foot and angrily starting to scrape his fingers up and down the highest point of the arch. Mrs. Cake squirmed and clenched her feet, trying to resist the intense ticklish sensations. Her feet were incredibly sensitive too. Too sensitive for her liking. She hated when they were touched or tickled with a passion. Unfortunately for the poor baker, feet that jolted at even the slightest touch was exactly what Anon liked. He scratched up the upper part of her right sole, keeping his eyes locked on the sexy ring-linked set toes. Mrs. Cake's face, was red. Most of the blushing and from howling and her laughter, she couldn't take it anymore. The floodgates burst open as steady stream of angelic laughter poured out from her. Dear, Anonymous realized that his captive's left foot hadn't gotten any sort of love. He switched his hands now, making sure that the squirming left foot stayed still. Mrs. Cake's toes curled to try to lessen the tingling plague in her body, but Anon was too good at what he did. His fingers raked up and down her blue sole firmly and deeply, leaving the reddish trails to their wake. Stop! Please, no more! She begged for him. To her great surprise, he did stop tickling her so aggressively, but he was still running his fingers up and down her trapped sole, slowly and sensually. It's only been 10 minutes. Why would I stop now? What could you offer me in exchange for mercy? For now, he asked. Offer you? The unfortunate baker gasped out. I shouldn't even be here in the first place. Mrs. Cake started to scream out to the outside for help. Save your breath, little tickle slave. The rioters won't hear you. Anon said sternly. She was taken aback at the being called that. But Anon dug his nails right back onto her left sole, scratching from heel to toe. Oh my God. This is getting weird stuff. Y'all need holy water? I suggest it'll be useful. Oh dear. Mrs. Cake shook wildly in her bindings and her left foot desperately tried to escape the torment it was stuck in. All she could do, however, was grunt her nose, and this barely did anything to stop him. Because he clearly didn't give a crap. Anon slowly got bored of using his fingers on his slave's feet, though enjoying the silkiness of them thoroughly. It was time to move on to a new form of punishment for her rebellion. Without giving her poor left foot a break from dexterous fingers, he pulled a lot of feathers from one of his pockets and used his magic to direct every single one of them to her right foot. The gentle but precise teasing of her toes, as well as the dragging of the bruises and spaces between, drove her absolutely wild with laughter. Oh boy. Okay, I give. Mercy, Mrs. Cake screamed out when she felt the quills of the feather quickly pressing their tips on her ultra-sensitive soles. Anonymous heard her loud and clear and stopped the storm of tickling raging over her body. I'll do anything, please. No more, Mrs. Cake gasped out, trying to catch her breath. Anon perked up at the sound of that, responding. anything. All right. Either you put those feet to good use between my legs, or I just tickle you more until you do so. The fudge? Excuse me. It had to be done. Mrs. Cake's eyes went wide with shock. How dare you even ask? She was interrupted by a swifter feather duster brushing up and down her abused left foot, as well as 2 fingers carefully tickling her right heel up to her right arch, and 5 feathers sweeping up and down from under her toes to her upper arch. When did he get a Swiffer? Oh my god. How the heck did he end up with a Swiffer? Okay, he probably got that from the local grocery store or something. And then maybe grabbed the... You know that thing that you use to sweep your floors and that? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Despite Mrs. Cake's constant begging for mercy and her pathetic attempts at bargaining with her tormentor, all this unrelenting teasing and tillerization of her souls went on for hours and hours. Not one pony outside was able to hear her extremely hard laughter or her cries for help. In the middle of the torture, and not even decided to keep her souls completely still using magic, forcing her to endure every single little stroke. Jeez, can he just chill out for a minute? I hope he does. Okay. I'll give you Mrs. Cake screamed out, truly unable to take any more. Once again, Anon put his own enjoyment on hold to listen to Mrs. Cake's negotiation. I'll give you a job. I'll just... Let me go after, please, she begged, and Anon nodded, sitting on top of the counter, his legs hanging over on Mrs. Cake's side. You better do a good job of it, slave. Mrs. Cake was very seductive, very agile when she needed to be, despite her looks. And I don't want to imagine how that could end up. And somehow, weird stuff is about to happen. And secondly, you all need holy water. Oh, interestingly enough, we're already over halfway done through this thing. Which I think this is probably one of the shorter... Yeah, this is probably one of the shorter My Little Pony fanfics out there. I ain't even gonna lie. Mrs. K, okay, I already said. So she gave Anonymous a false seductive smile of desire and was still able to move her feet through the ropes enough to grip the zipper of Anon's pants. She undid the zipper and pulled down his pants using only her feet, but after a bit of staring and blushing, managed to wrap her silky warm feet around his cock. Anon moaned quite loudly, closing his eyes and enjoying the sensation. Deep inside, Mrs. Cake hated this, but she decided to put her best foot forward, squeezing this throbbing length between both of her toes on her right foot, gliding the top sole up and down the side of his shaft. Mrs. Cake dragged her big toe from the tip of his cock down to the base and then hugged his dick tightly between her arches, sliding both soles up and down the sides in opposite directions. Anon started to groan, the constant leaking of prey from his tip, allowing her feet to slip up and down without any chafing. Her soles were smooth enough to do without any lubricant, but his prick cum certainly helped. Jeez. As Mrs. Cake curled her toes lightly under the sides of his shaft, squeezing it with a loving-caring firmness, and slid her toes up and down. Anon grunted, unloading all of his pent-up sexual frustration into her captive's beautiful blue feet, turning them partially white. Mrs. Cake hated this and hated him, but she had to admit the warmth felt kind of nice. There, let me go. There, let me go, Mrs. Cake demanded, but her face blushing a deep bright red. Anon shook his head, pulling his cock away from the clutches of her toes and redressing himself. While he may have been more than satisfied with the job she did, he desired more from his captive. Are we surprised? What do you mean, no? You said you would release me if I gave you a foot job. I don't owe you anything else. I fulfilled my part, she shouted angrily. Anonymous grinned devilishly at her, pulling a book of spells from his pocket. Oh, but you don't have a choice, slave. Anon chuckled, looking at his spell book. His horn lit up. A beam of energy hit his captive directly on her forehead. Her eyes widened and she restrained herself, desperately trying to free herself from the bindings of the renewed vigor. Something was changing in her head. And this is about to get really weird. Grab your holy water, grab your bleach, and mix in 2 shots of vodka. Oh my god, that was awesome. That'd be really funny. Her struggles got weaker and weaker, and her feet started to rub against one another. Something was compelling her to do this. She knew it, but she felt a very perverse desire for pony contact on her feet, tickling her otherwise. Mrs. Cake started to notice that the area between her legs was getting warmer. As in, it's going to be a mess, and then she's going to have to clean it up. Well, actually, he already made a mess, and now she's already going to have to clean it up later. Once this is all said and done. She let out a frustrated groan, the white fluids leaking down to her feet, spreading out all over both of her soles. Anon watched this with glee. He knew the spell had worked. Now let's try this again. Are you going to be my submissive, sexy tickle slave forever? Or am I going to have to tease you until you agree? He asked. He gave Mrs. Cake's left foot just the slightest little touch, enough to bring her halfway to an orgasm. She panted and gasped. She couldn't take all of this teasing. She didn't know magic. She couldn't call for help. There was only one way she could make the best of her situation. Yes, I'm yours. Ready, all yours. I need you to touch me, to tickle me until I can no longer take it. Please. The baker pleaded with her captor. Anonymous gave her a seductive smile, using his magic to cut her free from her bindings. Now stand up and come over here, or I'll tease you for the next 5 days. Mrs. Cake gasped, her sweaty blushing from barely able to stand. Her cum-splattered feet hit the carpet behind the counter, and the soft bristles of its pressed against her tender, sensitized feet. She could barely hold back her strained giggles as she walked off the carpet onto the floor. Now take my hand, slave. You need a new home, Anon said to her. She blushed, not wanting to be kept from coming. She grabbed his hand tightly. Anon then teleported the two of them to his home. It was a cave out in the ever-free forest, closed off by a rock that Mrs. Cake had no hope of lifting. Why am I getting my immortal flashbacks from this? Or they could be going to, like, good God, like a dark forest or something to make out or something. Who knows? Anon grabbed Mrs. Cake by the waist and led her deeper into his cave, where a medium-sized cell was carved into the wall with a comfortable-looking bed and a table with shackles. Anon opened up the cell and pushed his new captive in it firmly. This is where you stay, tickle slave, and if you don't want to be teased and edged, you'll do anything I say. Anon said to her, and she whimpered and nodded. Despite being the captive of a perverted unicorn with a love for her feet, he treated her somewhat kindly in the grand scheme of things. And that is almost on the verge of rape. Every single day, Anonymous tickled her sensitive body in many different ways, and the spell he put on her wasn't about to wear off anytime soon. Enough time passed for the poor baker to get used to the constant stimulation of her feet, and being permanently naked, locked in a cell to be used for pleasure at the moment's notice. No pony ever came looking for Mrs. Cake. Ponyville now hated Sugar because of the senile old unicorn. This was perfect because Anon was able to keep his tickle slave for as long as he wanted, and Mrs. Cake obeyed his every command without question. Author's note. I wanted to give my thanks to the handsome fellow who commissioned me to do this. This was rather a fun idea to write. And now you gave everyone the thought that they need to want to cleanse it away through holy water and all that. Wow. Anyway, so that was that. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in another bad fanfiction reading. Bye, guys.